Hello and welcome to Motorsport Speak, a motorsport podcast brought to you by Motorsport Week and motorsportmonday.com. My name's Dan Lawrence, and as ever I'm joined by our editor Taylor Powling to discuss all things Formula One. We are now talking about the first two Grand Prix post-summer break, the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort and the Italian Grand Prix at Monza. Both two very different races with very different results, and also adding to the championship picture in equal measure. First, Lando Norris and McLaren romped away to a dominant victory at Zandvoort, and second, Charles Leclerc stunned McLaren to take a surprise home win for Ferrari in front of the adoring Tifosi at Monza. Let's get into it, Taylor. It's all to do with basically how McLaren handled those two races, I think is the main talking point, and how it's affecting the championship fight. The constructors' table has closed. Red Bull only have an 8-point margin over McLaren. The drivers' championship looks like it could be on for Lando Norris if McLaren maintain their trajectory and Red Bull continue their troubles. But the gap with 8 races to go is still 62 points from Norris to championship leader Max Verstappen, despite the Dutchman not winning in the last 6 Grand Prix. It was all looking rosy for McLaren at Zandvoort. Despite a slow start from the front of the grid, Norris was able to recover and he was unchallenged. He got the pole at Monza. Piastri lined up against him second. We know there's not strict team orders, and Norris also has his record, doesn't he, of not being able to lead from pole at the end of the first lap, and it happened again. He did hold the whole shot down to turn 1 at Monza, but turn 4 Piastri put on a really good and quite sort of tough move on his teammate, and that sort of set the tone for the race. It changed the race. Norris ended up third. Piastri ended up second because obviously the 2-stop situation and the 1 stopping Leclerc ended up beating them both. It's interesting. I think after Zandvoort, everybody thought, oh, really, McLaren have got a handle on this. We know that they've probably got a handle on the Constructors' title, but Zandvoort made it feel like, at least to me, that, okay, the Drivers' Championship's probably on now. But then Monza, it seems there's this whole papaya rules thing. Are they meant to race? Are they not meant to race? Should McLaren enforce team orders on the first lap? Should they prioritise Norris? If they do it now, does it look like a sort of a meek response to the fact that Norris was mugged by Piastri on the first lap? There's so many sort of questions with the title picture that have come up from the two races, and the swinging of the narrative of things looking more assured at Zandvoort to maybe looking a bit more shaky for Norris in Italy. But yeah, it's really interesting, Taylor. And just what are your thoughts on the whole? I guess comparing the two victories. We'll get to that actually later. But let's talk about McLaren first. What is your overall thoughts of the McLaren vibe after these two races?
Yeah, hi Dan. Norris said going into the summer break that he needed a reset, and it seemed that he got what he wanted at Zandvoort because he was absolutely dominant. A 22-second win with McLaren's upgrades, and it kind of, really set the stall out for what he was aiming to do in the second half of the season. And even Andrea Stella, the McLaren team boss, said there's honestly no reason they can't win every single race, and yet, as that's been the tale with McLaren this season, they've not been able to sustain that momentum, and they fell flat on their face at Monza. I guess the one saving grace for them is that because Red Bull was so poor, they've actually, still taken double podium and got the lead down to 8 points, and it looks like in Baku they will take that Constructors' Championship lead, and it wouldn't be a surprise if they romped away with it and were unchallenged, because Red Bull's problems, which we'll get onto later, don't seem a short-term fix. Yeah, Norris, he did the hard part at the start of Monza. He obviously has that wretched record of not keeping the lead. That's now 7 races between Grand Prix and sprints that he's not retained the lead at the end of lap 1. But this time around, his launch was good. He got away. Piastri was behind him in second. But then he had a slight little correction coming out of turn 2, a slight little slide, which actually put Piastri right on his tail. And with the slipstream, that was just the edge that Piastri needed to be able to make that late break in around turn 4. And a lot of focus has been on McLaren's team orders or not using team orders, because at the end of the day, it effectively ruined McLaren's race in the sense that having had a 1-2, they were then 1-3. And in order to get track position for Lando over Leclerc, they had to pit him maybe slightly earlier than they wanted to, and then with the front grain in, that meant they had to do a 2-stop, and that lost both the 1-2 and the win. But I feel like a lot of the conversations about the McLaren dynamic and the higher rules is taken away from, once again, Norris has lost a race that he should have won. And I think if he doesn't win the title this year, he's going to look back on so many missed opportunities, because Max Verstappen's shown this year, and I think he showed it in 2021 against Lewis Hamilton, that decisive in a title fight is not only winning the race that you should win, but winning those 50-50 races. And Norris is at the stage this season where he's not won any of the 50-50s against Verstappen. His 2 wins have come. Miami was effectively gifted because of the safety car and because he botched qualifying that weekend as well. And then Zandvoort, where they had the clear fastest car, so it didn't even matter if he made a mistake at the start. But yeah, he's not winning those. He's not won a single 50-50 race, and he's not winning the race that he should. And that's ultimately, if he doesn't win the title, is where it will be his undoing. And I think it is wrong that the whole McLaren fiasco is taken away from Norris's mistakes, and I feel like it is a kind of a distraction on, the way I look at it is McLaren, they've had every right not to go all in on Norris yet, because at the end of the day, although Norris is fundamentally a slightly better driver than Piastri at this stage in their careers, he's not doing it consistently enough to warrant getting that support. I think Piastri's finished ahead 3 of the last 4 races now. He completely dominated Norris at Monza in the race. Norris had no response after he got past early on. So as Norris said himself, he's got to actually, as much as he'd love to get the team orders, he's got to show that he deserves them. I don't think on current form he has, because McLaren don't want to end alienating Piastri when, he's showing he's got the pace to win races.
The way I see it, I personally, I think prior to the Italian Grand Prix setting off, I think McLaren already should have made the decision to maybe not race on lap 1. Because you say the 1-3 weakened their position. You had Piastri at the front probably pushing the pace quite hard to maintain his lead that he'd found. And we do know that out of the 2 McLaren drivers, he's weaker on tyre management. And he felt he couldn't even do a 1-stop in the end. So that could have been because of the pace that he was running. And then obviously Norris being in traffic, dirty air, yada, 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 trying to use pit stops to get back ahead of Leclerc, all this and that moved him into a 2-stop. If McLaren are even not even thinking from a championship point of view, but thinking of it like, just let's keep position on lap 1 and then see where our race goes, it would just put them in a stronger strategy point, because you think maybe the 2 fastest cars in first and second at Monza, they could have just sort of dragged each other ahead, and McLaren would have been in a much more comfortable position, like Hungary, for instance, where they were able to play about with strategy, and yes, they made a meal of it at the end, but they were able to play about with strategy, weren't they? So that's one sort of thing on my mind. And also I just think the problem is now we've seen the fact that Norris again was weak and he even admitted himself he thought there was a bigger gap. He was too cautious. That's why Piastri got the jump on him, and he said Piastri did the better job. And I think now if McLaren do start favouring Norris on opening laps or putting team orders in a way to help him win the title, now that we've seen this lap 1 with Monza, I think the perception from people will be like it's being given to him, and that's exactly what Norris said he didn't want to happen after the race. He said he doesn't want to plead for help or anything like that. So it's just, I guess, the optics of it just will look a bit strange, and it's just. Yeah, I mean, Zandvoort, he looked confident and everything looked like it was going in the right direction, and now it seems straight away we've gone back to that mood that he was in post-summer break, and Verstappen must be looking at it, and I know Verstappen's saying that both titles aren't safe, but he must be seeing things like this. On days like Monza are days that are winning Verstappen the championship, essentially. He'll see Leclerc winning, Piastri ahead of Norris, and think, perfect. That's exactly what I need in terms of damage limitation. And there's 8 races left. The gap is doable for McLaren and Norris, but they need to be a bit more decisive, I think. I think they leave a lot open to interpretation with the way they handle it between the 2 drivers. And I guess, but Piastri doesn't know Norris anything, does he really? So
I mean, we heard from Andrea Stella post-race, and from all the indications, of his words, it looks like McLaren, they've acknowledged that Norris is their greatest bet for the Drivers' Championship, and also a big thing that swung their perception now is how much Red Bull struggled. If Red Bull if Red Bull had been in the same position as Zandvoort, whereas Max had come home, say, second or third behind one or both the McLarens, I think they would still be kind of reluctant to issue team orders. But the fact that Red Bull had the clear fourth fastest car this weekend, and Norris missed a chance to take an even bigger points gap out of Verstappen's lead, if that trend continue, I think McLaren have recognised that if that trend carries on, a 62-point gap between Norris and Verstappen, they can overcome it. Like, it does. If Verstappen's coming home 6th, 7th each weekend, and Norris is winning, that's like 15 plus points you're taking out of them each weekend. That soon comes down. So yeah, they've acknowledged that Norris is their greatest bet because he's 40 plus points ahead of Piastri. And it looks like they will. I don't think they'll impose team orders on Piastri if he's leading Norris, because I don't think they want to get into a position where they're asking Piastri to give up a win. That's not at this stage anyway. I think if it got down to, say, 10, 20 points in the last few rounds and Piastri's winning and he's not in the championship picture, then realistically, of course they're going to ask him to move aside for Norris. But while the gap's 60 points, I don't think they, if Piastri's got head on merit like he was at Monza, they're not going to ask him to move aside. But I think what will happen now is that if Norris has pole and Piastri's alongside and they have a front row lockout again, and based on current form, McLaren look a good bet to do that a good few races towards the end of the year. I think if it comes out that Norris is ahead after turn 1, they will tell Piastri not to attack him. And it'll be interesting to see whether Piastri obliges to that, because underneath the smiley and, talkative exterior, internally, as Martin Brundle said, he is ruthless.
Yeah, as all racing drivers should be, I think. And I think you're right in saying a little bit Norris needs to sort of prove to McLaren that he is up to the task. I think Baku's a very good test in terms of if he gets pole there. Yes, turns 1 and 2 are easy ones to manage from pole, but then you've got that very, very long run, haven't you? And you could easily see his race run extending to 8 of not leading the first lap from pole if someone got him down that long straight down to turn 3, but at Baku. But yes, let's talk about Red Bull. But quickly, before I lead into it, I think the importance of them getting the drivers' title this year can't be understated. Yes, the constructors' title is great. Yes, McLaren's form is great. Yes, they've improved a lot since last year. But Red Bull going from winning all but one race last year to now not winning 1 in 6 is proof that nothing is guaranteed under these regulations. And we don't know if McLaren try to push the envelope with their car more, that they end up encountering issues like Red Bull have had in 2025. So if they don't win both titles this year, there's no guarantee they'll get another chance next year. And then, of course, we have no idea what's going to happen in 2026 with the regulations being blown wide open. So they've really got to maximise this opportunity, I think. And yes, let's talk about Red Bull then. Won all but one races last year. Started this year in dominant form, winning by a distance at Bahrain. They had 1-2s at Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Suzuka. They looked in good form. But they seem to have unlocked what Max Verstappen's called a monster. He says they've turned the car into a monster. They've had these balance issues, and they were masked a little bit at Zandvoort, the slower speed circuit, needing a lot of downforce on the car, but the issues were still there. But Verstappen still managed to finish second, despite there being this disconnected balance from front to rear of the car. But it was really exposed in Monza. They had issues in qualifying where they went slower in Q3 on fresh tyres compared to their times in Q2 on scrub sets. And yeah, just not looking good for Red Bull. They don't seem to have answers. They've got a lot of problems. This car that just doesn't want to do what its drivers want it to do. Perez saying it's interesting that now Max is suddenly having the troubles I've been having all these races. So I think it takes a lot of the heat off of Sergio, to be honest, because the disconnect between it happening to each driver is interesting. But yeah, it just doesn't look like there's a light at the end of the tunnel. But we do know with these regulations, I guess, if you can fix something, it will turn around pretty quickly for you. These cars seem to be on such a knife edge, as Lewis Hamilton said. in press conferences and media and what have you. But it does look like things are unravelling for Red Bull, and it really is quite remarkable, the turnaround. I mean, I say it time and time again, I've banged my drum on this loads, but it is remarkable how they've gone from being so dominant, the year looking like it'd be another 2023, to now we're hitting multiple cars winning and multiple drivers winning, and Red Bull is not looking like they've got a Scooby really. And it's tough times for them.
Yeah, it's absolutely staggering. I certainly in my time watching F1, I can't remember anything like it. I remember when we were coming back from Monza, or it might have been Zandvoort, we were talking about it, and I mentioned how, okay, yes, there's some comparisons to the Brawn, but in actual fact, Brawn didn't have the budget to develop their car from the start of 2009, and then others just overhauled them. Red Bull have the budget to operate at the budget cap, and if anything, they've just added upgrades that not necessarily made the car worse in terms of a performance perspective, because they are still gaining time. It's just that they're introducing problems to the balance side that's meaning they can't unlock the full potential, whereas others are kind of operating close to that ceiling. The car just looked an absolute nightmare at Monza, and I think in some respects, I don't think Max drove very well last weekend. I think Red Bull struggles are kind of shielding his weekend, because I mean his qualifying gap to Perez was marginal, certainly not what it usually is. He was having lots of moments, and I think it was kind of him trying to do more than the car was capable of, and it just regressed him close to where Perez's level was. But yeah, I mean, if Monza's now kind of the form guide for how the rest of the season's going to go, and we do have to be careful because Monza has specific circuit characteristics, but Baku's not been a good track for Max, even though he's won them multiple times. Singapore, last year was the one race they got caught out. So yeah, we should be not necessarily setting a precedent based on Monza to say Red Bull are the fourth fastest team, but based on how Max and Red Bull have performed at Baku and Singapore in recent years, I think they're going to find it a real struggle in those next two rounds. I think Max would be delighted if he comes out of Singapore with his lead above 50 points.
Yeah, and I think Baku and Singapore, those are two tracks you want to have confidence in your car. I mean, if you feel like your car's not doing what you want it to do underneath you, those are not the tracks. I don't think those are the tracks you want to be going to. And intriguingly, obviously, after the mini autumn break, we go to Austin. And Christian Horner said that there's evidence in data from the RB19 starting at Austin that there were limitations that could expose them down the road. And I guess we're now down the road, and here they are. So that's interesting as well. So maybe there's no guarantee even at Austin that they're going to perform. So I think, as you say, if he comes out of Singapore and he's only given up another 12 points to Norris, I think he'll be feeling very, very comfortable. It's the how quick this gap can come down for McLaren and Norris is going to be important. The smaller the gaps come down as the races go by, the more comfortable I think Verstappen should feel that he'll be able to perform some magic to keep the title alive. And I mean, let's face it, I think he'd still be a worthy drivers' champion, because he I mean, yeah, as you say, like maybe he was over driving to get around the issues at Monza, and maybe it wasn't one of his greatest weekends, but we're comparing that to a standard which is so high. So I think he'd be a worthy drivers' champion, and it'd be one of those drivers' championships where it's not necessarily all down to the car. We are in a weird season. That is for sure. I mean, George Russell said it after Monza. It's a weird season. Mercedes came into the summer break having won 3 and 4 races. Ferrari looked like the 4th fastest team, nailed on. And it looked like that even in qualifying at Zandvoort almost. And then all of a sudden in the Zandvoort race, they had great pace. Sainz Q2 exit, but he managed to fight through the field and finished 5th, if I'm not mistaken. And Leclerc 6th to 3rd. So at Zandvoort, all of a sudden they unlocked pace in the race. In qualifying at Monza, Leclerc and Sainz weren't happy. They felt like they could have done more. Leclerc especially feels like he could have fought for pole, but just turns 1, 2, 4 and 5, he couldn't get the speed from his car. But the stars aligned for a Ferrari Monza win and a second one in Leclerc's career, and it was a stunning race from him. And they just it was all going to be about managing the tyres, and Ferrari absolutely nailed it. I think he pitted on lap 15 of 53, and from there on he thought he was going to struggle with the one stop when stuck behind Piastri, but Piastri got out of his way, and all of a sudden the pace came back to him with clean air. And we saw, didn't we? We saw a social media post highlighting Leclerc's laps, I think from lap 18 onwards, and there was only one lap where he didn't set a 1:23 lap time, so you could see just how it was. Probably, I think it was the best race of Leclerc's career, I would say. And Ferrari were banking on this run of tracks, Monza, Baku and Singapore, being good for them. They've already delivered one win. They won in Singapore last year. We know Leclerc's good at Baku. They're not even that far behind Red Bull in the constructors. I think it's something like 40 points. Leclerc's kept himself in a good championship position. I mean, they haven't got McLaren's car. But things all of a sudden are looking good for Ferrari. Meanwhile, Mercedes in this 2-week period have been in the doldrums and not been able to fight for wins and not been able to fight for the podium, and which has been a very interesting sort of change in the scheme of things post summer break. But I think before we get into the meat and bones of that, a Leclerc win at Monza is, I think, a privilege, or a Ferrari win at Monza is a privilege to witness, and it's one of those moments of Formula One which just, I think, is always worth sort of stopping and recognising. I think the Tifosi, the Italian crowd, are unlike any other, and yeah, just a very, very magical Formula One day, I think that was, but also just a great 2 weeks for Ferrari.
Yeah, it was. We were very fortunate to be there. It was like a bucket list moment, if you will. And you said Leclerc hasn't necessarily got the pace of a McLaren car, but that ponders the question, where would he be if he had the McLaren car this season? Because he has been phenomenal for most of the campaign, other than those few races where, Ferrari's form nosedived and he was conducting experiments to try and help them cure the bouncing issues. He's been, for the most part, consistent. And I've actually just read a stat that he has the same amount of top 5 finishes as Norris and Verstappen, but he has one more top 4 finish in the pair. So in a car that's had its inconsistencies and on peak form hasn't been as good as the Red Bull and the McLaren, he's delivered better results. So I think you could genuinely I'd have him as the second best driver this year behind Max, and I think you can make a claim that he's been the best driver just because of how much it ebbed and flowed. And I go back to when I said that Norris isn't winning races that he should win, and he's not won any 50-50s. Leclerc's just blown him out the water by winning a race that Ferrari probably shouldn't have won. And that just, I think, goes to show how much he's matured now as a driver, and he's getting a lot of plaudits, rightfully so, on social media. But it's a shame that it's taken him to actually, get a car that is good in race trim to be credited with drives like this, because he's been brilliant at tyre management since 2020. I remember the 70th anniversary Grand Prix when Mercedes had that really bad blistering and that let Red Bull win. Leclerc did a one-stop in that SF1000 to 4th place. That was no mean feat, and it's always been the narrative that Sainz is the one that's good in races, whereas Leclerc's brilliant in qualifying but can't replicate that in the race. But that's completely the opposite to what it should be, because Sainz's gap to Leclerc is closer in qualifying than it is in the races. It's just the fact that Ferrari have, until this year, not been able to assemble a car that's competitive in the race, that Leclerc's not been able to replicate his scintillating qualifying laps over a longer race distance, because I think now this performance really highlighted that he's the complete driver, and if he gets the car that can win a championship, I think he'd be more than capable of doing it.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's really interesting what you said there about sort of the 50-50s. I mean, Monza was by no means a 50-50 for Ferrari, so even more impressive, wasn't it, really? But in terms of taking these chances to win, Leclerc had his chance at Monaco, he took it. He had a chance here, he took it. George Russell's had chances, he's taken his chances. Hamilton's taken his chances. I mean, go back to Australia, Sainz took his chance. These drivers are taking their finite opportunities to win and grabbing them by the scruff of the neck and delivering the goods, whereas Norris is getting multiple chances and not doing it. It is a really interesting question you pose there. How would Leclerc have done if he was in the McLaren? it is. I mean, we're begging for him. I think we're begging for a championship caliber car for Charles Leclerc, because it would be. I think he'd sparkle. It would be. He's ready to do it. I mean, we saw in those early races of 2022, he had no problem racing Max Verstappen, and yeah, it's just a shame. Obviously, the peaks of Ferrari are very, very high, but there's troughs as well. Similar with Mercedes this year. It's a bit of an up and down for them, and they're on a downward curve again. And it's interesting. They unlocked something with their car from Canada onwards, and looked really, really good through to Spa, and then it has started to unravel for them a little bit. And it's not like they've got terrible issues. It's just pace, it seems. Yeah, what's your take on sort of Mercedes' situation and whether it can be resolved in the short term?
Yeah, it's a strange one, because it looked like in summer break they'd cracked most of their recovery problems from previous years, 3 wins in 4 races, and genuine pole positions and wins on merit. But then the last few races kind of reverted to how they were, not necessarily at the start of the season, because that was a far cry away from what they are now, and the margins are so small. But yeah, they've looked third or fourth best, and not in contention for the top podium positions at both Zandvoort and Monza, which, yeah, it's a difficult one to explain. I mean, they didn't have their out-and-out raw pace, and then degradation was quite high for them on Sunday. I don't think they can put this one down to the setup being out of the window like it was at Zandvoort. I think Monza was just a track that doesn't necessarily suit the characteristics of the W15, and it remains to be seen whether that upgraded for what they brought a Spa and then abandoned running midway through the weekend and then put it back on in Zandvoort. We've not actually had any clear-cut answers on whether that's necessarily, triggered something that's taken the car out of the sweet spot that it was in prior to the summer break. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I don't expect Baku to be amazing for Mercedes. Singapore last year, they were fairly competitive. Austin's usually a good track. Austin's always been a good track for Mercedes, even under this regulation cycle. So like how Silverstone had always been good for them, and then they locked out the front row this year, I think Austin will be a big test of where they're at, because I'd imagine somewhere like Austin, McLaren will be flying. I think Red Bull will be competitive again, even with the state of their current package. So yeah, Mercedes might have a couple rounds of pain, but Austin then will be a barometer of whether they've actually, just had a few rounds where the car's not gelled with the track, or if it's something deeper inherent to their car.
Yeah, we seem to really entered an era of Formula One now where the cars are incredibly track sensitive, more so than I can remember for a long, long, long time. I mean, we've had years where it's just been, you have a dominant car and it presides to be dominant across the course of a campaign, but it's really ebbing and flowing in these weeks and months recently. So that's the sort of top 4 picture. Into the midfield, at Zandvoort, Williams had their long-awaited upgrade delivered, and Albon delivered with a Q3 qualifying appearance before a marginal error on the measurement of their floor got him disqualified from qualifying. He had another Q3 qualifying appearance in Monza and delivered points. 10th on the road, 9th at the end of the race after Magnussen's 10-second penalty. So out of the sort of midfield pack, Williams are the only team to score points across the 2 races since the summer break. Albon said that he feels like the upgrade has brought them to the front of the midfield fight, which is really good to see after a sort of difficult first portion of the year for Williams. And also, I guess the other thing we need to discuss is there's been a rather big change at Williams in the fact that they now have a different driver in the second seat. So obviously there was much talk about Logan Sargent's future never being certain for the rest of the year. Much talk about those upgrades, and then the talk about Sargent's future ramped up even more with that needless crash in the final practice session at Zandvoort, which has been talked about to death across media in various places. So I don't think we need to bore our listeners with hearing that again. But obviously it's intriguing that they picked Franco Colapinto, their Williams Academy graduate, to fill in for the rest of the season. And personally, I just want to say on him, I think it was a really, really good debut. He built himself up through the weekend, just getting accustomed to Formula One, accustomed to the car on the track. Obviously, he made that mistake pushing in qualifying, so to try and get out of Q1, which he failed to do. But he said the one thing he needed to learn was the tyres. He started 18th. He did a one-stop. He gained 6 places. He finished 12th. So I think that's a very good start for Franco Colapinto. It looks like a promising start to post-summer break life for Williams. It's good to see that they're in a position to maybe pick up some points throughout the rest of the year and fight with the likes of Aston Martin, RB, Haas, Alpine, race by race. What are your thoughts on Williams? It's not quite a McLaren resurgence, but it's a mini resurgence and a driver change.
Yes, I'll just cover Colapinto quickly because I don't have much more to add. But yeah, he was a very assured debut, and hopefully it's, for Williams' sake, it's not kind of a false dawn like it was with De Vries when he went well at Monza with Williams in 2022. He's got some tough races coming up in Baku and Singapore, not the ideal venues for rookies, but after that he's then got a run of tracks that aren't easy, but more conventional and, less punishing to mistakes. And if he can take it, he was only a few tenths off Albon per lap really in the race. If he can take that through and just slowly chip away at it and at least be in Albon's ballpark at the end of the season, that'll be a real good job well done. One thing going in his favour will be the fact that Williams looked to have made a step forward with the upgrades. It's their first proper upgrade package really this entire year, one that's actually tailored towards performance. And although historically Williams have been good at Monza in the past, this FW46 was a revamped car concept that was kind of aiming to take them away from being potent on low downforce tracks. And since the start of the season, it's kind of been a case of they've been stronger at their weaker tracks, but weaker at their best tracks. So they've kind of just leveled out and been on the fringes of the points. And that's why they only had 4 points to their name before Monza. So the fact that, yes, you could say, okay, Monza's a good circuit for them historically, doesn't really bear any relevance because of what's happened over the winter. And the fact that they were able to, with this upgraded car package, get Q3 at Zandvoort, Q3 at Monza, points at Monza, I think that's really promising signs for Williams.
Yes, I mean, Albon's even said obviously there's more to come with their upgrades. They haven't encountered correlation issues with this one, unlike a lot of their midfield rivals, but maybe those correlation issues could come back and bite them. Let's hope it doesn't. Aston Martin in the points with Alonso at Zandvoort, just out of the points with Alonso at Monza. Stroll really struggled with his tyre degradation at Monza, so he was out of the picture, and a poor qualifying showing from him as well. Alonso said that they're now the 7th fastest team. He thinks they're behind RB, Williams, Haas. There's a lot of work that needs to be done for Aston Martin to sort out their issues. They seem to always struggle with development. Whether that's going to change with the new wind tunnel next year, maybe it will. Hopefully it does for them, because they've got designs on greater things. They've got designs in the short term of just returning back to the midfield fight, which really is swinging from race to race. I mean, RB didn't set the world alight in Monza, did they? And Yuki had a new floor and really wasn't happy with it. And Ricciardo obviously doesn't want to judge it before he's driven it, but it could look like, again, RB have installed an upgrade that hasn't worked for them. It does look like with a lot of these midfield teams, it is whether they can nail these upgrade packages is vital to this battle of 5th through 7th in the constructors.
Yeah, Aston Martin look like they've just checked out on this season, and it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest, just because they've got a sizable lead over RB, who, as you said, in themselves haven't got the pace to score points at the moment. And when most races you're going to have the top 8 places filled, and the most a midfield team can score is 3 points, with 8 races remaining plus a couple of sprints, Aston Martin are all but securing 5th place. But that still doesn't, you can't use that as an excuse for their current performance level. As Alonso said post-race, they're ending up behind Haas's, RB's and Williams now, which you expect Aston, even with their drop off, to be at least fifth best, but they're regressing to where they were kind of middle of 2022 before Alonso joined the team, so it's not been good enough. It casts a lot of doubt on what they can achieve in 2025, and I think really it's just they're going to be a bit like Sauber at the moment. Obviously not as near as terrible a position as Sauber are, but I think they're just in a holding pattern until 2026 when they, hearing rumours that Adrian Newey should be announced Aston Martin next week. He won't have an impact till 2026. Obviously Honda coming on board. So yeah, I think Aston Martin, from where they were early 2023, they've not been able to build on that position, and they've just kind of regressed down, and I think they will just be a midfield team until 2026. Looking at RB, it's not looking good for them. Tsunoda ran an upgrade package this weekend, and unlike Ferrari, it doesn't seem to have, solved their problems or to help them take a step forward. If anything, it looks like they're going to be scratching their heads even more, which it must be so frustrating if you work there, because having one upgrade package fail is bad enough, but then to taking it off or most of it off and then, put time and resources into another one and that not appearing to have done anything of their fortunes either, it must be really frustrating and just a challenging time. And it's not ideal for Daniel Ricciardo when his future's up in the air, and his actual race performance, minus the penalty for squeezing Hulkenberg, and then obviously that was compounded by the mechanic touching the car. His race performance was actually solid again. He kind of did what he could. He did a really good stint. I think it's like 40 plus laps on the hards. So he's chipping away at it, and he is putting in good performances. He just hasn't got the car to show it, which must be really, really tough mentally for him, because he's obviously under pressure to retain his drive.
Yeah, it is increasingly looking like we will have Liam Lawson probably in the RB next year. There's a lot of talk of his future will be announced, this month or what have you. There's been talk of potentially lending him out to another team, say Sauber, but that doesn't really look viable. So it does look like Ricciardo's position is in danger, especially if, it feels like Perez has not earned his stay maybe in the narrative or optics side from the consumer, but from the team, I think they're quite happy with the decision they've made. Whether that will change at the end of this year, I don't know. But and also RB, obviously they're fighting really hard to finish sixth, and with Haas, when the tracks favour their car, they do tend to deliver the result, and they picked up a point at Monza. So it's only a point, but it's a point more than RB scores, and it could have been 2 points as well, if not for a 10-second penalty for Kevin Magnussen. And I think this is the biggest story for Haas across the 2 weekends. And it was quite a soft 10-second penalty, going wheel to wheel with Alpine's Pierre Gasly. They touched, both cars went offline. Neither really gained an advantage or disadvantage. Neither car had any damage, but Magnussen picked up his 10-second penalty and his long-awaited final 2 penalty points, taking him to a race ban, something that's been looming over his head like the Grim Reaper since Miami in May. So he won't be at Baku. It was always inevitable that this was probably going to happen in the end, just the nature of, Magnussen's no holds barred reproach, but it is a bit of a shame it's come in a situation like this where it doesn't really feel fair. Presumably, Ollie Behrman's going to be in the car at Baku. I guess it cost Haas an extra point that they could have scored. Also, Hulkenberg being squeezed out by Ricciardo on lap 1. He was in a good position to score as well. So Haas, from a car performance perspective, had a very good Monza, but circumstances meant they're not heading to Baku in the best of moods.
No, it's a very mixed bag, and I can understand Magnussen's remonstration, because I said to you at the time, even before the penalty was imposed on him, that yes, Magnussen's gone deep and it's his fault that the contact's been initiated, but in actual fact it was a minor touch. They've both cut the chicane and Gasly's kept the position, and that was even Gasly's view post-race, that it shouldn't have been enough for a 10-second penalty, especially when Hulkenberg squeezing Ricciardo, Ricciardo squeezing Hulkenberg, is been given a 5-second penalty. I don't really get the understanding behind giving Magnussen 10 seconds. And yes, it was inevitable that he was going to get it, so I guess maybe it's good to get out of the way. It's a surprise that he's gone this long since Miami without penalty points. It's a shame that it's clouded probably his best weekend of the season.
Yeah, it definitely was. Yeah, I mean, all the time Hulkenberg is normally the one who's chasing those points for Haas and sort of leading the team, and Magnussen's doing these defensive jobs to help him. And for once, it was on Magnussen to deliver for the team with Hulkenberg's misfortune, and Magnussen did the job. And yeah, it's all been sort of ruined, hasn't it? Which is a shame. Moving on to Gasly and Alpine. Very, very good Dutch GP weekend for them. On Gasly's side of the garage anyway. Obviously, qualifying Q3, had that incredible start where he got both of the Aston Martins on the first lap, and that helped him, getting in amongst with the top 4 teams for some of the race, defending, battling, and obviously he then finished the best of the rest in 9th. But then at Monza, Alpine just didn't have the pace, and they've got these struggles, haven't they, with obviously the plans to cease producing F1 engines at Viri. The Viri staff are obviously digging their heels in, and they don't want it to go through. There was even a peaceful protest at Monza. Gasly had brake issues post-qualifying that carried on into the race. Ocon, again, it wasn't a great race weekend on his side of the garage. Yes, the story at Alpine continues to be a tricky one. A new team principal, Oliver Oakes, has got quite a task on his hands to turn the performance around for that team, and advisor Flavio Briatore's got a lot on his hands, sort of managing the behind-the-scenes situations that are going on, I guess, and along with Renault Group CEO Luca De Meo, and obviously Bruno Faman's still in the picture, trying to, I guess, calm all the tension at Viri, but yes, Alpine is never a dull story, is it?
No, it's just a shame that their stories tend to be controversial at the team's expense, and they tend to be about things happening away from the track rather than on it necessarily. It's no surprise Alpine struggled this weekend. I mean, the long straights of Monza with an underpowered Renault engine was never a recipe for a good result, and they were quite frankly anonymous. It was a surprise that they got both cars through to Q2, but they never really trebled the points positions. They weren't in that battle, and yeah, it just seems like obviously they're not going to make massive strides to now the end of the season. It's just about kind of what foundation can they lay down for 2025, which will basically be null and void anyway come 26, both because of the new regulations and potential engine change, which they said they've made no decision yet, but it seems like they are leaning towards a customer supply, and it's just a case of trying to do as much damage limitation as they can with the Renault side.
Yes, and damage limitation probably in maybe French court with Viri. It looks like there will. I think Alpine and the Renault Group will get their way, won't they? Obviously, because they've got their heart set on it, and it will save them something like $90 million a year. So I think they're going to have to go through the harder yards and the pain and strife to get what they want. It's a shame for all the staff at Viri, and a shame that a facility that's made Formula One engines for several decades is going to be no longer doing so. But yes, as you say, sort of damage limitation, this period of transition, 2025. A big part of that now will be Jack Doohan, Alpine Academy driver, the first from the Alpine Academy to actually make it into Formula One with the team, given that Zhou obviously went to Sauber and Piastri, we all know what happened there. A Formula 2 race winner, one who's had to sit on the sidelines as a reserve driver. Alpine did try and chase Sainz, but once that obviously didn't come to pass, it made sense for them, I guess, to promote from within. It's looking like it's a 1-year deal for Doohan. He's obviously a capable racing driver. Is he the biggest talent? He's not a Leclerc or a Russell talent to come out of Formula 2 or a Piastri talent, but he is a talented racing driver. I'm sure he'll do a good job. Whether he does a good job to retain his seat into 2026, we'll find out, because there could be more movement in the driver market, and maybe Alpine are looking for a bigger fish for 26 if they can sort the performance side out with the car. But yes, that was announced in Zandvoort, and I think everybody in the paddock and everyone in the team was just very, very happy for Doohan that he's got his chance.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with the kind of saying Alpine are approaching it from a the options on the market once Sainz decided to go to Williams weren't stellar. So why not invest in one of your own while you wait for a better name to come on the market, potentially 2026? Yeah, I mean, he's not the most standout driver. And I think it's a shame that Alpine have had so many good talents in their academy and just the timing's not been right. And I guess in that sense, you can kind of say the same with Colapinto. If he had come around, if the opportunity that Sargent had came around now, Colapinto could have had, a year and a half in the car already, and who knows what would have happened if he'd have established himself as a, really good midfield F1 driver. It's just all about timing, and it's worked out favourably for Doohan. He's been patient. He put in the hard yards in the sim and his previous car testing experiences this year, and he's now got the gig alongside Gasly. It does look like it's a 1 year deal, so he's got a lot to prove next season. I fear for him in a way. I think Gasly will trounce him in all due respect, just because Gasly is a very competent F1 driver, and Doohan's coming in a bit like Giovinazzi in a sense, where he's playing catch up because he's been on the sidelines for a year, albeit he's had more F1 experience than Giovinazzi had in the run up to it, and I imagine he'll have more, maybe a couple more FP1 outings potentially, and also like testing previous Beck Alpine cars, but it's not the real thing. It's not a proper racing environment. So I do think he's starting on the back foot, and it's just a case of he's going to be holding the place until Alpine get their hands on someone better when they'll have a much more competitive car.
Yeah, I mean, let's hope it goes well for him. I mean, look at Colapinto. He's had not even a full season of F2 and one practice session in the FW46, and he jumped in and finished 12th on debut. So, I mean, with Doohan, he does all the sim sessions. He's, as you say, the TPC program, FP1 sessions. So he should hopefully be as comfortable and as prepared as an Alpine debutant in Formula 1 could be. So let's hope it goes well for him there. There's one team we haven't talked about is Sauber. Mainly because they've been awful. And, I mean, I laugh, but it's really not been good for them, and it's obviously a shame because obviously there's a load of hard-working people at Hinwil, and they obviously want to have a good result. Their drivers want to have a good result. I mean, Zhou's future is looking less and less certain now, isn't it? And he looks like the final year of his F1 career has come in a car that he really just can't get to grips with. Bottas is his future. I mean, with the way the market's fallen, he's looking stronger or more certain that he'll stay at Sauber. But again, the task on Audi's hands to turn this team around is unbelievable.
I mean, yeah, you're spot on there. It's hard enough for Audi, having to focus on the engine side and actually, nearly an asset engine project. They're also then taking over the team that is the worst in F1 at the moment. So it's not, they've not got any foundations to be competitive in 2026, and you have to say, I think it could be a rude awakening for them then. I mean, their one sole hope is that it is new regulation, so it's a clean slate, and we saw in 2022 that, okay, fair enough, it wasn't down necessarily just to the aerodynamics or the chassis of the car, it was more the fact they were at the weight limit from the outset, but they do have history of being semi-competitive at the start of a regulation change. I mean, that's what they'll be clinging on to, and hoping the Audi engine's not woefully off the pace of the others like the Renault is at the moment. Yeah, I mean, Bottas looks like the favourite to get that second next to Hülkenberg. He told me when I spoke to him on Friday at Zandvoort that he wants a multi-year deal, and you can understand that because I think Sauber are resigned to another challenging year next season. I think pretty early on, if not straight away, they'll allocate all their resources to 2026 once January comes.
Yeah, I mean, what you say about the Audi engine as well is I mean, when Honda started, it was awful, wasn't it? And it took them several years to get going. You've got hope that doesn't happen to Audi, but if it does, you've got hope that they have the patience to stick it through, because obviously it's paid dividends for Honda. Yes, driver market picture is tightening up. It is essentially, we're looking at what Red Bull are going to do with their seats. We're looking at what Sauber are going to do. But Mercedes, we know what they've done, and they've gone for Kimi Antonelli. I mean, obviously we knew it was heading this way, and it's finally been announced. And Antonelli had a lap and a half to show the F1 world what he's capable of in FP1 at Monza, just going straight to the top of the timing sheets and looking to do that again with his second push lap, but obviously he pushed a little too hard, a bit of over exuberance, and went off at Parabolica, didn't he? So and crashed on his second lap in FP1. But I think the world saw what he's capable of. He's quick, and at such a young age, he looks like he's going to be quite exciting when he gets to Mercedes, the full-time seat in 2025. So that's I think it's the right move. I mean, we've had all these flirtations with Verstappen, which never really felt like it was going to happen. But I think Toto's even said he doesn't want to flirt with outside teams now. Is that what he said? So hopefully Antonelli and Russell can form a long-term partnership, which I think it's going to be really good. I think Antonelli, obviously, he's been part of the Mercedes journey since he was 12, and Russell had a very similar route into Formula One. I think Russell is obviously a very sort of level-headed driver, isn't he? I think he'll be a great mentor, but also I think they'll challenge each other, and I think that'll be a really fun thing to watch next year, that team dynamic, and just to see Antonelli. And it's good that, we came into this season with a driver lineup that was the same as last year's for the first time in F1 history, and now we're getting fresh blood coming into the series next year, and Hamilton at Ferrari, Sainz at Williams. We've got obviously Behrman and Antonelli, and I think it was a good move. I think a good announcement to see Antonelli get his shot.
Yes, it's nice to see a top team take a punt on a young driver and not go for the perhaps safe choice like Carlos Sainz. He's definitely got a lot to learn, and it's going to be a steep learning curve for him, because at the end of the day, he's already jumped F3 to go into F2, and now he's already being primed for an F1 seat with Mercedes, a team that will have aspiration based on their, the fact they've returned to winning ways this year. They will have their sights set on the title next season, so there'll be a lot of pressure on Antonelli to deliver. And as you said, I hope that, although Toto's kind of denied that he's going to be shopping around for Verstappen, I think if Max was to become available, he'd still jump at that opportunity. And in a way, although you can't turn down someone like Max Verstappen if he's available, just from the fact of what he can bring to your team and the fact it would weaken Red Bull, it would be a hard decision to make out of who you lose out of Russell or Antonelli, because at the end of the day, if it does end up being a shootout between the two, it's not exactly fair on Antonelli, who is already, got his back against the wall and a lot to learn, but he's going up against George Russell, who is someone who's been no slouch against a 7-time world champion, and in many respects this year's been superior in general pace. So hopefully, as you say, Merck give both drivers the chance to blossom together, and I think long term it will be a really, really strong partnership.
Yes, I agree. Just one thing on Verstappen there. If Newey goes to Aston Martin, Dan Fallows is already there. Honda will be there. If Verstappen's going to jump ship, is Aston Martin going to be the destination? Let's put that out there as a rhetorical question and let that simmer and settle and end our discussion there, I think, Taylor. I think that's a good place to end. Thank you for joining me for this run through the last two Grand Prix. We will now look ahead to the rest of the season. We hope you two listeners enjoyed what we had to say and are also looking forward to the rest of the season. So, like, subscribe, review Motorsport Speak on whatever podcast platform you choose to listen to it on, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Make sure you keep up to date with motorsportweek.com and our free-to-read weekly digital magazine, Motorsport Monday, which you can find at motorsportmonday.com. And make sure to follow us on socials at Motorsport Week on X, formerly known as Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, you name it. But for now, from us, goodbye.